getting the exposure to grow your small wedding business can be difficult. With millions of engaged couples using The Knot to plan their weddings and find vendors, advertising on our sites will connect you with more couples than anywhere else online. Meet engaged couples where they're already searching for vendors like you, and let us deliver leads to help you grow your business. Visit vendors.thenot.com/podcast to sign up today. Mention code podcast15 during your free onboarding session for 15% off your first month.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 230, an interview with Robin Hutton about her latest book, War Animals, the Unsung Heroes of World War II. So thank you, Robin, for being with us tonight. I really do appreciate it. I enjoyed your book, and as we were talking about last week, I'm an animal lover. I have a dog, a border collie named Finn. I have 2 cats. This is horse country because we're in Virginia, so I love horses. And so I absolutely loved your book. It's incredible what these animals were able to do. But even if you're not an animal lover, the stories behind what these animals were able to help with during the war effort was absolutely incredible. So if I could just start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and how this book, War Animals, came about.
Well, Ray, thank you so very, very much for having me on your show. I know it's going to be a fun talk today, and I'm just so blessed to be able to talk about this wonderful new book of mine, War Animals. And what is fun about it is I first wrote a book on Sergeant Reckless, the great Korean war horse. And the book was called Sergeant Reckless, America's War Horse. And I don't know if you know about Sergeant Reckless, but she was this mare that was purchased over in Korea by the Marines to carry ammunition for the recoilless rifle. And she was so heroic. She's listed in Life magazine as one of our all-time greatest heroes. And in one battle, just to give you a brief thing, in one battle, she made 51 trips up to the guns, most of the time by herself. Each round that she carried weighed 24 pounds. She would average 8 to 10 of those at a time. And she carried 386 rounds on her back, which is over 9,000 pounds in one battle. She walked over 35 miles up hills and through open rice paddies, was wounded twice, but she never stopped. She even carried wounded off the battlefield. Don't know how many exactly, but in my book, I mention that. So she's just this amazing horse. And after the war, she came back to America and lived out her days at Camp Pendleton. And I have spent the last 5 years placing monuments to Sergeant Reckless around the country. I have 3 of them. There's one at Quantico at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, which is stunning. There's one at Camp Pendleton where she lived out her days and is buried. And we just placed one at the Kentucky Horse Park in Lexington, Kentucky last May. And so that was my start in my love of honoring animals with books. And I nominated Reckless for a war medal that the British use. It's called the Dickin Medal, the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals. The PDSA is their moniker, PDSA Dickin Medal. And this medal is known as the Victoria Cross for Animals. And it is it was awarded to, during World War II, 32 pigeons, 18 dogs, 3 horses, and a cat during World War II. Wow. And that's when it was started. And so so I nominated Reckless for this, and she got it. And, it's just the greatest award an animal can receive for gallantry and bravery in a military action. So when I was going over to England to get this for her in the summer of 2016, I reached out to my publisher and I said, can you do a press release on this? This is really kind of cool. And I think it needs to be done to get the story out there and everything. And so he researched the Dickin Medal a little bit, and he saw all of these great animals that had received it. And he says, well, what do you think about, doing a book on these animals? And I said, I'd write that in a heartbeat. And I was like, please let me do this. So he says, well, get me a proposal together. So I put a proposal together, and I had to give it an American angle as well. And so I combined in the book, I have all of the Dickin medalists in the book. Some, of course, their stories are more detailed than others, but all of these incredible animals are in there. And so that's kind of where it all began. And so it took me a year to research and write the book, essentially. And I'm just so excited to be able to share it now.
Great. So I think it's very lucky for me that you're on this show at this particular time, because in the timeline of World War II, I've just started the Pearl Harbor attack. So let's jump into this. So when Pearl Harbor is attacked on December 7th, 1941, and I did not know this, the United States military did not have a dog program. And for those of us who read about World War II or are into it, we know about the Germans' use of dogs. We know about the British as well. But the Americans they did not have any kind of program. So how did the American version of dogs serving in combat come about?
It's a fascinating piece of history, Ray. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't believe it when I discovered that fact. You just assume these things. Yeah. And dogs have been mascots, but they never served. So what happened when Pearl Harbor was bombed? A poodle breeder and a socialite, New York socialite named Arlene Erlanger, got together. She had friends with the American Kennel Club, Westminster Dog Show. A friend of hers wrote for the New York Sun. She gets together with all of her friends, and she says the dogs need to play a part in this. And she and her friends put together an organization known as Dogs for Defense. And it came together in January, I believe, in just a couple of months, 1 or 2 months later. Mm-hmm. And this organization convinced the Army to get war dogs and to train war dogs. But what was so fascinating about this is when they got together, they put out a cry around America, advertised for people to donate their personal pets. Mm. Now, I don't know about you, but my Misty, you're not taking my Misty to war. You feel the same way about men, Yeah. Seriously, World War III. We're skipping World War II. We're going right to World War III. You touch my dog, Exactly. But seriously, people answered the call. Wow. 40,000 dogs were donated to this. Now, not all of them, of course, made the cut. Some were too old. Some were not the right breed. Some didn't have the right temperament. But 40,000 dogs, and that was whittled down to 20,000. And ultimately, 10,000 425 ended up serving in America mostly, but also going overseas as messenger dogs and sentry dogs and scout dogs and things like that. And then the Marine Corps started their program as well, starting with dogs for defense animals that were trained. And then they started with the Doberman Pinscher Club of America, donated Doberman Pinschers to the Marine Corps to train. So it was just a fascinating piece of history. And it was so cute because even if your dog, a fundraising program that started there was really kind of cool. It was called the War Dog Fund. And if your dog you could even enlist your turtle if you wanted to. If you paid like $1, right, your animal could be a private. If you paid $100, he could be a general or an admiral, nice, this kind of thing. And this was a way that they raised money for the cause. And you'd get a certificate and you'd get a little button and all of this kind of stuff. And it was just an amazing time. And Arlene Erlanger actually helped write the training. There were no training manuals. There was nothing that, taught the handlers what to do, And so there was, I believe it was 5 depots, Army depots were set up for training, Fort Robinson, and I can't think of the others right now, but all around the country, there were training centers set up for these dogs. Mm-hmm. And I have some wonderful pictures in the book about the training and everything. And I'll be putting more up on my website at waranimals.com over time, because they're just such, great stories. Seeing these dogs, Afghan hound, the poodles made the cut, in the first things, because they're very smart animals,
Right.
And so it's just fascinating. And it was such a patriotic time, and people just felt compelled to do this. And there are some amazing stories about our war dogs that served over in Europe and in the Pacific.
Yeah, I certainly enjoyed the pictures in the book. It really made it a lot easier to comprehend. And again, even though we're focused on the animals, I mean, the handlers in
Yes.
your book are absolutely incredible. And I guess not only the bond between the humans and the dogs, but just that just the handlers came to really appreciate the abilities and what these dogs could do. And there are going to be parts in your story where the handlers are like, no, let the dogs handle it. They can do this.
Right, exactly. There's a wonderful quote from Alan Shapley, who was the commanding officer of the 1st Marine War Dog Platoon, and he was with the 2nd Marine Raider Division over in Bougainville. Mm-hmm. And as they're landing, his quote essentially says, just remember, guys, it's the dogs that are most important here.
And that's going to turn out to be true as
dogs.
Yeah, and that's going to turn out to be true in the stories that we're about to jump into. So you mentioned, I think you mentioned just a second ago, sentry dogs. What other kind of, duties or training were these dogs expected? Even though this is an experiment, what kind of other duties were these dogs going to have?
Well, it's interesting because there were, the Coast Guard took dogs and horses and would patrol the beaches because they were afraid of more sabotage, like, being Pearl Harbor being attacked. Right. They were also worried about our coastlines being attacked. So the dogs would serve as patrol dogs and attack dogs. These dogs also would guard like our munitions plants or airports or different kind of factories that were very important. And you'd see these dogs just on patrol, and it was quite fascinating. The messenger dog was used really extensively in the Pacific. Because especially in the jungles, the walkie-talkies were basically useless. And so these messenger dogs would carry their messages from, one handler to the second. And that was what was so unique with the messenger dogs, is they had to have 2 handlers trained and everything. So it's just amazing. And then there was the casualty dog, which would also serve as a patrol dog. But the casualty dog was one that would go and look for people that maybe were wounded and, were unconscious or, get back. And so they would go and try to find where the wounded soldiers were. But it's just amazing to see all of these different types of training that needed to take place. And the silent scout dogs, I think, are really the amazing ones. And those would be the ones that would be on patrol, like in the Pacific on Bougainville. Mm-hmm. And, you can just imagine the dog is, its natural instinct is to bark at danger. Right. But these dogs couldn't, and, they had to be silent, or that would, the enemy could detect where they were. And so the handler had to find ways to notice how the dog responded. Like some of them, their hair would stand up on the back, or they'd have like a low growl, or, their ears would go up, or they'd tense up or something like this when they'd get focused on something bad is out there, Yeah. And so it was just really interesting how much of a connection these handlers needed to have with their dog to understand what it was that he was seeing or trying to convey. But all these dogs went through special training, and even more so at different stages along the way. And it was really quite fascinating.
So let's jump into this because, again, there's a ton of stories in your book. We're just going to hit some of the few that really stood out to me. But again, just the example of what these dogs and horses and pigeons and cats could do was incredible. Right. But if you could please tell us about the one and only Chips. I enjoyed that story the most.
Isn't he just the best? And Chips was donated. He was a Husky Collie German Shepherd mix. Wow. And he, he had a tendency to chase the postman and bite the garbage man. And so the Wren family in Pleasantville, New York figured that, well, if he's so good at that, maybe we can stick him on the Japanese or the Germans, to try to, train him into being this great war dog, So Chips actually was he was on the very first battle or landing, actually, that took place in North Africa. He was on Operation Torch. And that was in November of 1942. And that was the very first operation that America entered. Right. And he was with General Patton, 7th Army. And he was just this amazing dog, and he was trained through the Army. And so what happened with Torch, they'd land on the beach, and suddenly, they're being shelled, of course. And so the handler starts digging a, foxhole for him, and Chip sees him doing it. So he starts digging a foxhole for himself, and all kind of frantic. But they were able to, there's not a lot written on him during that particular thing, but they were able to successfully land and eventually capture Casablanca. Mm-hmm. But a couple of, about 2 months later, what was so fascinating is in Casablanca, between January 14th and the 24th, 1943, the Casablanca Conference took place with President Roosevelt, Sir Winston Churchill, General de Gaulle was there, and other Allied leaders all took place in this 10-day conference. Right. And that's when the unconditional surrender was the only accepting thing that they would accept from the Axis powers, the Japanese and the Germans. It had to be unconditional surrender. And so Chips was a sentry dog. For 10 days, he guarded President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. Right. And it was really something else. He met them both, and it was just really, really cool. So his day of destiny came on July 10th, 1943, and that is with the invasion of Sicily, and it was part of Operation Husky. And it's amazing what he did because they landed very early in the morning on the beach in Licata, which was to the west of where General Patton was landing. And when they hit the beach, they're suddenly hit with machine gun fire from a machine gun nest that was up in the jungle area there. And so what happened was the guys hit the deck, of course, and Chips broke free of his handler and charged the pillbox, the machine gun nest, and oblivious to the barrage, oblivious to the all the bombs that were coming down, the bullets that were flying around. He jumps into this machine gun nest, and the guys hear gunfire, and they're thinking, oh, my gosh, our dog, he's probably killed back there. Right. But suddenly Chips comes out with the gunner by the neck, basically dragging him out of the gun nest, and 3 other Italians with their hands up in the air, because they were afraid this dog was going to kill him. And it was just amazing. And he got injured. He had bullet graze his back and everything, and got some powder burns from the gun and everything in there. But he saved the men, and they were able to advance the farthest that day because Chips took out the gun nest. Now, what was also interesting is later that day, he 10 Italians were trying to sneak into camp, and he alerted his handler to that, and they captured 10 Italian prisoners of war. And so he was just this amazing dog, and he survived the whole war, and he guarded Germans when they were in Italy, and he was also part of the Battle of Salerno and Naples Loggia and a couple of other campaigns. And it was right after the Battle of Salerno where he met General Eisenhower.
Wow.
Yeah, no, he's got friends in high places there. And so he meets the general, and the general bends down to give him a pet, and Chips nipped him in the hand. I know. But all was forgiven because that was what he was trained to do. Nobody was supposed to touch him but his handler. And so, there's a great picture in the book with General Eisenhower and Chips there. But it was really, really amazing. But what happened with Chips is because of what he did in Sicily, he was awarded the Silver Star.
Wow. And
he was actually cited in his papers. He was cited for the Distinguished Service Cross, which is just below the Medal of Honor. Mm-hmm. And but they gave him the Silver Star, which is our third highest military award. They gave him the Silver Star instead. And he actually was awarded it in a battlefield ceremony. And it was written in all the papers that the dog got the Silver Star. And sadly, and he was also up for a Purple Heart for his wounds.
Right.
But sadly, because he was a dog, there was a national outcry that by the MOW, Military Order of World Wars and Purple Heart, that a dog should not be awarded these medals, that it somehow denigrated the humans who received it, and which is really sad. So they took Chips's medals away from him, and which was really sad. But there's a wonderful, I'll tell you a wonderful story on what happened to him in a moment. But so after the war, he went through detraining, and he came home to a hero's welcome, and had 6 photographers come in there and follow him in the train, and got back to Pleasantville, and he met his little 4-year-old Johnny Wren and his sister Nancy and Gail, there. And he came home to a hero's welcome. And it was just wonderful. So, when I got the Dickin Medal for Sergeant Reckless and started learning all about these wonderful animals, I nominated Chips for the Dickin Medal. Mm. And sure enough, last January, on the 75th anniversary, when he guarded Roosevelt and Churchill, we were in the Churchill war rooms in London with Churchill's great grandson, Randolph Churchill, and Chips was presented posthumously the PDSA Dickin Medal.
Wow.
And what was so cool about that is little Johnny Wren met his war dog at the train station, back in 45. And don't you know, little Johnny Wren, who is now 78, was at the presentation, and he received the Dickin Medal for his dog, Chips. And that was just a great day. So, it was just wonderful. So, I was so proud to be there and be part of this and have this dog honored. And there's a picture in the book of John Wren with the war dog that we used as a stand-in for Chips, wearing the Dickin Medal. It's just beautiful.
That's great. And I didn't think about it before I read your book, but now, of course, now it makes sense that, you don't want just anybody handling these dogs or touching these dogs. They've got to be, I guess, minded by their handlers. And so I guess because that was trained into them, just like everything else, I guess the dog couldn't get in trouble with Eisenhower just because that's what he was trained to do. If you're not one of his handlers, do not touch him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. So
And
it's pretty amazing.
yeah, and I was impressed about the devil dogs of the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And so if you could tell us about them, please, because I enjoyed that was an incredible story as well.
Yeah. So, they, the Marine Corps, took on their own training of the dogs. And they actually took 3 of their messenger dogs that were trained from Dogs for Defense, went to the Marine Corps to Camp Lejeune for training. But what's interesting is how the name the Devil Dogs came to be. That's from World War I. And supposedly it was the Germans called the Marines I think it's called Teufel is the name. It's called Satan or Devil Dog because it was after the Bella Wood, which was this. They were just, the Marines just gave their all and just wouldn't stop. Just wouldn't stop. But what's an interesting thing is that's supposedly where the name came from. But it appears, according to the National Museum of the Marine Corps, it appears that phrase was in a newspaper printing earlier than Bella Wood. And so it's really quite interesting that it was a different encounter with the Marines that supposedly the Germans named that. So, but anyway, it's really kind of cool. But during World War II, what was really neat, they had 132 Dogs for Defense dogs went to the Marine Corps. And what was so neat, Ray, about the Marines is they kept a book for every dog that served. And they're in the National Archives. And I held every one of those war dog books and scanned them of all the dogs that were in the 1st Marine War Dog Platoon.
Wow.
And it is just, seriously, such an emotional day, as you can imagine, as I'm opening up and reading, these dogs and what they did and when they got their shots and, what it was stunning, just absolutely stunning. And there's over 1,000 books of these Marine Corps dogs, which is really, really cool. But the first wave of dogs hit Bougainville in the Pacific. The 1st Marine War Dog Platoon went over, and November 1st, they landed on Bougainville. And there were 24 dogs, 3 messenger dogs, and 21 Doberman pinschers. And it was really, really amazing that they stopped from Lejeune. They stopped at Camp Pendleton and did some more training with the dog handler actually who trained Toto in The Wizard of Oz. Yeah. So Toto's trainer is trained double dogs, which is really kind of cute. Right. And there were 7 Marine dog platoons that went and served in the Pacific. But in my book, I just cover the one, just to give people an idea. And other books had been written on a couple of the other ones. But Bougainville was really something else. So what was cute was on the ship going over, they had to set up a whole little area for the dogs so they could relieve themselves and everything, and it was really kind of cute. They had little stumps, for them to pee on and stuff. It was really, really kind of neat. But so they hit the beach and on November 1st, 1943, and it was just an amazing couple of months while they were there trying to back off the 40,000 Japanese soldiers that were on the island. It was really something. But, they persevered, and there were some really great dogs in that whole platoon that really made it happen.
Right. Yeah, speaking of which, so since you brought us to Bougainville, could you tell us about Caesar's exploits with the Marines?
Caesar was a beautiful German Shepherd, just this beautiful German Shepherd, and he was owned by the Glazer brothers in the Bronx. And these three boys, Morris and Irving, and I can't think of the other kid's name. Anyway, they all went to serve. And so when they left for their service, they decided to put Caesar in to serve because they thought he would do great. Mm-hmm. And so he was just this beautiful messenger dog. He was actually trained by the Army, and he was one of the dogs for defense animals that then went to the Marine Corps. And when they hit the beach, he was a messenger dog, but he also would guard his handlers at night. And he was right in the very first patrol that day as they're trying to move inward from the beach, into the jungle. They were trying to just get as deep into the jungle as they could to try to set up roadblocks and stuff. And Caesar was the messenger dog that would start running. He was the very first messenger dog we had that would start running messages back and forth. And, Ray, it's just amazing when you think about it. They would strap a message to this little capsule on his neck. Mm-hmm. And his handler would say, "Report to Paul," his other handler. Right. And that dog would just take off, and it could be a mile away, or whatever, and he would find his way back to his handler and through the jungles, which is so amazing, and it boggles your mind when you think about it. And he was shot at, of course, but he still got his messages through. But what happened was every day he'd run messages back, but on the third day, his handler was sleeping, and Caesar heard the enemy, coming in towards camp, and he jumped out of the foxhole and started to charge the enemy and to protect his handler. And Mayo, his handler's name was Mayo, woke up and called him back. And when Caesar turned to come back, he was hit in two places. He was hit in the shoulder near his heart and in his hip, his left hip. And he went down, but he ended up actually he went missing. And of course, Mayo was so upset because he didn't know where his dog was. Right. But Caesar did make it back towards the command post. And he was found, and they made a stretcher for him, and they carried him to sick bay. And the doctor was able to remove the one bullet in his hip, but not the one nearest his heart. Right. And he made a full recovery and went on to other places. I think he even went to Okinawa, but sadly, his book, and it's so strange, Ray, his is the only war dog book that had pages missing. And which really saddened me, because I would have liked to have seen really the awards, or what he did, or what his handler wrote in the book about him. He's one of the only dogs that he didn't. Sadly, he didn't make it out of Okinawa, but he was just this amazing dog, just a beautiful dog.
Right. Yeah, I think it's. I think in your book you said something like 3 weeks short of VE Day, 4 months short of VJ. I guess he's killed in action, and like you said earlier, he was the first messenger dog in combat. So he certainly deserves his award.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And it's really bless his heart. You just love their perseverance and their sacrifice.
Here's a question for you. What would you do to save humanity? And how far would you go to stop someone who was getting in your way? The ancient rivalry of assassins and Templars cuts to the heart of good versus evil. But it wasn't always clear who was good and who was evil. Plug in to explore the amazing world of medieval feuds. Echoes of History, Assassins vs. Templars is a special collaboration between History Hit and Ubisoft, the masterminds behind the Assassin's Creed games. Hosted by Dan Snow from History Hit and Matt Lewis from Gone Medieval, together they will take a close look at the real history of the secret societies, which inspired the Assassin's Brotherhood and the Templar Order in the Assassin's Creed games. Plus, they will bring on other premier historians as they discuss unearthing the myths of the Grail and who really was the inspiration for the main characters in the game. Echoes of History, Assassins vs. Templars podcast is available right now wherever you get your podcasts. Listen and subscribe to Echoes of History today to discover the hidden truths that have shaped our world and inspired the video game series. That's Echoes of History, wherever you get your podcasts. Listen today and subscribe for more. Could you tell us, and sticking with Bougainville if we could, and the Marines, if you could tell us about Jack, the German Shepherd.
So Jack is such a cute dog, and he's got part of his ear missing in the pictures. You can tell him because there's two. Caesar was a dark like a Belgian, almost like a Belgian Shepherd, but Jack and the other messenger dog Thor, they really do kind of look alike, except Jack's ear is half gone from a dog fight.
Wow.
So you can imagine what he did. But he was trained at Camp Lejeune, and he actually was part of the second wave that came in from Bougainville. And he also did security, walking around the camp, and as they all did. Making sure that none of the enemy was trying to get in and stuff, but he was an amazing messenger dog, and he was part of this. He was on a patrol, and they were up by the Piva Trail, and he was with one of his handlers, and the patrol was attacked. And the guys were outnumbered. They couldn't get any messages out. Jack was hit in the back, grazed in the back, and he was bleeding badly. And his handler was badly wounded in the leg. And so they are, their lines of communication had been cut. So the commanding officer was able to get over to Jack's handler, Gordon Wertman, and said, your dog is the only chance we have to get out of here. And what do you think? Do you think he can take a message back, And, Gordon just said, well, he's got a lot of guts, let me see. Right. And so they put the message in his capsule, and Gordon just said, report to Paul. And, Jack just kind of mustered up everything he could, even because he's wounded and he's scared and hurt and everything. And he got up and ran, was shot at, but made it back to the camp and with the message. And the reinforcements were able to come, and stretcher bearers were able to come and get the men out. And he saved the day.
Wow.
And it was just really, really something. And he too made it home after the war. Yeah, he made it back to his family.
Was he another donated dog? I'm trying to remember.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
All of these were donated dogs. All of these were donated dogs.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was the Verhege family. I'll have to look and see. But I tried to give for all of these where I could find a little information on the dogs, and stuff on their families that they had. But it's just amazing. And there's some beautiful pictures of him in the book. I actually was able to talk to Gordon Wortman's son. Sent me some beautiful pictures of his dad with the dog, and he would write these wonderful letters home, talking about how much he loved Jack and everything, and what a good dog he was. And it's just really fun and I have quite a few of his quotes in the book, to hear the swell language. It's just cute. It just touches your heart when you read about these. It's just it's really something else. But one of his handlers, Homer Finley is still alive, and there's a picture of Homer with Jack in the book. And Homer is 96 years old, and he lives in Colorado. And he has had some wonderful stories about Jack, and especially when Jack was in detraining, Homer saw him when he was at Camp Lejeune going through detraining, and he's there. Oh my God, that's my dog, Jack. And the guy saying, "Oh, don't get near him. He's bad news,
Right.
And don't get near him." Well, so Homer opens up the cage and goes in to see him, and old Jack recognized him and comes bounding over and is licking his face, loving on him, because he's with his friend. And,
That's incredible.
it's just really kind of cool, really cool.
Now, I have to ask about Andy, the Doberman picture, because when I was a kid, we had a Doberman, a big, beautiful black Doberman. He was his name was Prince, and we loved him, and he was nice, and he was very gentle with us, even though he looked scary as heck. But one night, someone broke into our house. I was like 12 years old. Someone broke into our house, and and it was a guy, but before he could even get 1 foot into the doorway, Prince was up and at him. And as much as we loved Prince before that, we treated him like a prince afterwards because they saved us. So, Dobermans are there, but I don't think most people appreciate how intelligent. I mean, they're tough, but you said in your book, as far as the Marines are like, look, we're all fighters. We're not going to have dogs who aren't, to some degree, going to be fighters. And so Andy certainly proved himself.
Yeah, he sure did. He was probably the best silent scout dog that they had. He was one where he too had gotten in a couple of dog fights, and his ears are kind of, you can tell him from the others because his ears are kind of a little mangled and stuff, but he was stunning, just stunning to look at. And on the very first day when they landed, he and Caesar were part of the very first patrol to go out, and Andy led the way, and Caesar, picked up the back end, to run the messages back and stuff. But they landed on the beach, and Andy was one too that could go off leash. He was one of the few that would go off leash too, and they were going up. They were about 400 yards into the woods, and he stopped. And this is their first time working with him in the heat of battle. So they really don't know what to expect. It's one thing to go through training, but it's another thing to be in the middle of it all. Right. And, you just have no idea what to expect. So at first, the guys were just, they're the dogs. Some of them weren't dog fans and stuff, but
sure.
Andy, they were going up, and he stopped, and his ears went back, and he, his shackles rose and stuff. And he kind of pointed in a direction, and he was one that would do a low growl. Now, of course, he wanted to bark his head off.
Right.
They would talk about how tense these dogs would get, because it was like, please just let me in. And so they sent a couple of the guys out ahead, and sure enough, there were snipers up in the trees at the end too. And it was just amazing that he was able to. They killed the sniper, and suddenly Andy just went way up in stock. He just was, that was it. And the men were able to advance because he did this several times along the way. Mm-hmm. And there was another time a couple of weeks later after that where they couldn't find where these snipers were and these machine gun nests were because the jungle was so thick. And there's a couple of pictures in the book that you can really see how thick these jungles are. I mean, right. It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And his two handlers said that, let him take Andy out there. The two of them would go out and see what Andy could find. And sure enough, they get out there, and Andy was able to spot not one, but two machine gun nests on either side of the trail, and they're kind of they were on either side, and they had they were in the crossfire, so they would spot you coming or going. It was just amazing what they had set up. And his handlers then were able to go and throw grenades into these sniper nests and kill the enemy. It was just really amazing that he had that ability to sense these things and smell these things. But, these dogs are just so smart, and they have an incredible sense of smell. And it was just amazing what he was able to do. But he was just a great scout dog, really a scout dog.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite stories. But if we could move away from canines for a moment, I was absolutely amazed and flabbergasted about G.I. Joe, the pigeon, not the comic book hero. If you could tell us about G.I. Joe. Oh, yes, absolutely. So before I tell G.I. Joe's story, I got to throw in this wonderful little anecdote. Sure. So last in July, I was in there's a brewery in Crete, Illinois, just south of Chicago. It's called Evil Horse Brewing Company, and they make a Sergeant Reckless beer because Sergeant Reckless loved to drink beer. Right. Now, this is a really great beer. It's a pale ale, and so they had Sergeant Reckless Day at this brewery. So I always take my books, and I have a Briar horse for Reckless, and I have mugs and T-shirts, and all of this stuff. And I have my little table set up in this brewery, and I have a pop-up banner that tells Sergeant Reckless's story. Mm-hmm. And this guy comes up to my table, and he's reading it and everything, and he said, "Oh, man, my dad would have loved this book. He was a Marine." I said, "Oh, really? When did he serve? Where did he serve and everything?" He said he was in World War II. He was with the 2nd Marine Raider Regiment, and he was a dog handler on Bougainville. Wow. And I said, "Shut the front door." You have got to be kidding me. Who's your dad? And he whips out his phone. He said he had the war dog, Jack. Now, not the messenger dog, Jack. Right. There was a Doberman Pinscher named Jack, who was one of 6 dogs to get a commendation from the Commandant of the Marine Corps for his heroics on Bougainville. And he says it was a Doberman Pinscher named Jack. And I said, "Oh, my God, your dad is in my new book." And he says, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I have a picture of your dad in my new book." That's incredible. And I pulled out the picture, and I showed him which one it was. And it's at the end of the Devil Dog chapter. You'll see 4 of the dogs there with their handlers on Bougainville. And he was so shook up. I was so shook up. And I said, I have Jack's War Dog book. I scanned a copy of it that I can send to you. Oh, wow. And so he was all excited about that. And he writes me back, and he said, "I cannot believe this." He said, "But that is my dad's handwriting in that dog book." Wow. And that, lists what Jack was and stuff. He said, my daughter cannot stop looking at this book. And I was so proud and so pleased to be able to tell him and share with him
that, piece of history that, because they really didn't talk too much about it back then, and but for him to have these, I sent him every picture I had of Jack and his dad that I've collected at the different archives and stuff. But anyway, that was a fun little moment. So on to G.I. Joe. So, our pigeon program, these warbirds were really, really phenomenal. And there's a reason why the Dickin Medal was awarded to 32 pigeons during World War II, because the thousands and thousands of lives they saved, whether it be getting a message through, on the landing on Normandy on D-Day, being the first message through with what's going on, how the landing went. They were dropped, thrown out of planes, dropped behind enemy lines in just a little cage, hoping that somebody from the French resistance would find it and, fill out a form as to what's going on and release the bird. Wow. I mean, it was stunning. It's stunning what these birds did. Mm-hmm. You will never look at them and think they are a rat with wings again. You will seriously, sure. They're amazing animals. And so G.I. Joe happens to be the only American animal that received the Dickin Medal during World War II. Mm. And he's the only one. And what he did was he was hatched in Africa, and he was part of a unit in a British unit that was in Italy, and they were trying to break into this town called Colvivecchia. It's a small little village in Italy. Mm-hmm. And the Germans were holding tight in this village, and so a bombing mission had been scheduled for 11:10 that morning. Right. And so the Germans knew they let go of the town, and so the British were able to enter the town around 10:30 or so, mm-hmm. and they had no way to get word back to command that to call off the bombing mission. Oh, God. And so all they had was G.I. Joe. Mm-hmm. And so they strapped a message on G.I. Joe's leg and said, we're in town, call off the mission. And G.I. Joe flew 20 miles in 20 minutes and stopped the planes on the tarmac from taking off. They were just starting to take off, and he stopped them. And because of that, over 100 British soldiers' lives were saved that day. And because had the mission taken place, they would have dropped it on the bombs on, and the British would have been killed. So it was just really something. So G.I. Joe, after the war, when he was awarded this Dickin Medal, they flew him back from America and back to London, and he was presented his medal with at the Tower of London, and hundreds of people showed up. And it was just this amazing event when you see, the beefeaters holding up G.I. Joe in the cage, and all these kids are looking at it. It was really something to see how they honored these animals and the respect that they paid to these animals and stuff. And so it's just been a delightful thing. Now, G.I. Joe is stuffed, mm-hmm. and he was actually in a museum on an army base up in New Jersey that closed down. And now I think he's in a box at Fort Belvoir. Mm. But because I think they're going to be putting a museum of some kind in the Army Museum at Fort Belvoir. So hopefully he'll be on display again. But yeah, he was something else, boy.
That's a phenomenal story. I really enjoyed that one. Now, and just for all the listeners out there, I mean, there are a ton of stories. We're barely scratching the surface. But if we could do one more, sure. And I certainly do appreciate your time. So we've done the dogs, we've done G.I. Joe. Let's move on to the horses, one of my favorite animals. Could you tell us about their role in World War II?
Yeah, it was interesting because they thought when the war first broke out, we thought we were going to be needing a lot more horses than we actually did use. Most of the horses that we used were the Coast Guard used. Guarding the coastlines, and doing patrol there, because it was really hard to ship over horses. They took up a lot of space, and their feed took up a lot of space, and so it was really kind of hard to ship them. And only 49 or 50 horses were shipped over during the war. But they would acquire them over in England, on the war front if they needed them. Right. Strangely enough, but not strangely, mules were more important than horses were because they were pack animals, especially going over in North Africa and Sicily and the China, Burma, India campaigns. The mules, they would get thousands of mules were used at that time. And because they're, they don't spook as easily as horses, and they're a little bit more sure-footed, and, they just, and I just think they're so cute too.
It doesn't hurt.
No, it doesn't. So, but it was really, really cool. But the other thing that the horses did during the war in England, Ray, I came away with this book in the research. I have a whole new love and appreciation for the British people for what they survived during the London Blitz. Right. Being bombed every day, for almost a year. It's insane what they went through, never knowing when these attacks were going to come. Mm-hmm. And these innocent people were attacked because they were hoping that would break the spirit. The Germans were hoping they would break the spirit, right. Not fold. They would just fold, but they didn't. Their resolve was really something. So the horses police horses were used to help in when the Blitz hit. They would help control the chaos and the confusion and, just the horribleness of everything. These police horses were used, and they 3 of them were given the Dickin medal for their steadfastness and their ability to just keep everybody calm and cool and collected. Right. And that was Regal, Olga, and Upstart. And those 3 horses received their medals, and for all of the police horses that served so bravely during the war and trying to keep the peace. And you can imagine that they had to walk over shards of glass and metal, and just it was really something when you see about what these animals did. But they stayed calm and everything. But it's just it just is amazing. I think I have over 75 stories in the book, all these different animals. And one of the things that what this book has done for me is I really want to honor these animals in any way that I can. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to do a monument at first in like the Washington, D.C. area, and kind of have it like a sculpture garden and have all these different monuments, little monuments to these animals. But now it has turned into, I want to do an international war animals museum and have kind of be in the Washington area, Virginia, Northern Virginia, Washington, Maryland area, because that's the museum mecca of the world, basically. And have a place where people can come and learn about these wonderful animals and experience it, all of their stories and all the pictures that I've collected. And we'll have different, the artist that did the Sergeant Reckless monument, Jocelyn Russell, has agreed to do sculptures of many of the animals that are in the book. Wow. And other too this will be from from the history, the beginning of history till present day, honoring animals and showing how they served in war. And because a lot of this history is just not taught anymore. Right. And it doesn't matter. Even some of the smaller stories were smaller battles. It's still important history to learn about. And so I'm very excited about it. And I just returned home from a last week being in Washington, going on meetings and presenting this idea, and it's had great response. And so I'm very, very excited about it, just very excited about it. So hopefully we'll have information on that as the year goes on to try to see what we can pull together.
That would be great, and I certainly wish you well in that endeavor, because I would love to visit a place like that. And for the listeners, again, we've only done a very tiny percentage of the book. And just to mention everybody real quick, we didn't even get to Smokey, the Yorkshire Terrier who did parachute jumps. We didn't even get to Beauty, who sniffed out Londoners buried during the Blitz that you were just talking about, or Judy, the POW. And this one was really hard for me, but Judy, the POW dog who helped the humans survive the brutal Japanese prison camps. I mean, there are a ton of stories about just the relationship and how these animals could just lift the spirits of these humans, and just the bond that had to happen in these incredible, but at the same time horrific events.
Yes, and there's even a war cat.
Okay. That's right.
Simon War Cat, so you can't miss Simon, but they really are amazing. And I tried to keep the book not gory. It's not your typical war book. Because I want you to get involved. I want you to enjoy the read and have fun. I mean, I think I tried to keep it as light as I could and being respectful. But there are some instances where you just do crack up at some of these antics that these animals will do. So.
Right. And on the other side of that, just for the people who aren't animal people, and that's fine, but there is a lot of detail in here about the specifics of certain battles that I enjoyed a lot, that shone some light for me on certain aspects.
Oh, good.
But for everybody, you should please check out this book, and thank you, Robin, for being with us. It's War Animals, The Unsung Heroes of World War II by Robin Hutton. Please check it out, because you will learn a lot, and the stories, and this is, like you said, this is something you can share with your children and truly get appreciation of what their service was to the Allied cause.
Oh, good. Yes, indeed. I thank you for this, Ray. This has just been so much fun. And as you can tell, I can talk about these animals all day long.
That's probably where the book came from, your love of animals. And now that I've read your book, I certainly look at my Border Collie with a whole bunch of new affection, just knowing that what he's capable of, because he's smarter than I am, but I try not to let on too much. Yeah, well,
actually, and I'm sure you might have identified with Sheila, the Border Collie, that, saved the American airmen's lives.
Oh, yes.
Plane crashed, so you can't help but identify with them. And if you do have dogs or love dogs or cats or horses or whatever, you'll have a real appreciation for them. But it's been a fun book for me to write.
Robin, thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Ray.
What a beautiful day in nature. Boy, do I feel capital A alive. Luckily for you humans, Nature's Way put that thrilling feeling of aliveness in a bottle. Nature's Way Alive multivitamin gummies. Delicious multivitamins inspired by nature. Nature's Way.